the best way, honestly, to get to the anima in that transcendent sense is to go after the Platonic form and then relate to a real woman. And that will bridge it on the outside and the inside, and it's release.
Job done, isn't it?
Job is done at that point. It's released. It's released. It's brought into the world. It's instantiated. You have to make a suitable home for the anima as a man in yourself. You have to build the vessel, otherwise it won't be there. And you can't insist that an outer woman does it for you.
No.
You have to create the vessel. If you do that, you will attract the right woman.
Hello again, my friends, and welcome back to Jung To Live By. I've decided, as you can see, to spawn a disgusting teenage beard because it's lockdown and we're all stuck in Plato's cave, basically. But outside of Plato's cave, there is the sun. And the sun, of course, is the form of the good. And we're going to be talking about Plato's forms in some depth over the course of this conversation. So welcome back. Of course, we're going to be talking about Lilith today. We dropped a very mysterious trailer yesterday, just out of the blue. It's like, by the way, there's a movie being made. And it's been penned by Steve and by Pauline. And it's like, well, what the hell is this thing all about? Where did this come from? So that's what we want to explore today, as well as the anima and the animus in particular and how they relate to individuation, clearing some of those things up. Because there's a really beautiful thing about fiction and myth, and it's not something that you get from textbooks or from theory, and that really appeals to myself. It really, really does. And I know it appeals to a lot of you guys, that TI way of analysing things and going, I have recognised the anima in this myth, and therefore it's like it doesn't mean anything. It's watching them come to life on a screen or on a page, which is what makes things so healing. That's what myths are. They're healing if they're told in the right way. And so I want to begin by asking Steve, where did this story come from with Lilith? That's probably the best place to start, to be honest with you. You've mentioned before, and I've put it up on the page where you can pick up the book, Lilith, and of course we'd appreciate it if you did that, and it'd be very, very useful for your individuation journey, sincerely. And I want to get into that a little bit later as to how useful that particular story was for myself. But I'm curious, Steve, as to where the story came from. Because you've mentioned that it's femme inspiration l'orchidée, or your muse, Pauline, basically, was the starting point to where this story came from. So I'm curious as to how that process went down.
It's hard to explain, really. I guess the analogue is an artist, a fine artist muse, in that sense. But I'm not a fine artist. I can't paint at all or draw it in that sense. But it's the same function, because the relationship then is a canvas upon which the unconscious projects, but internally rather than externally. So rather than use an external artist muse like, say, the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood used Lizzie Siddle, it's an internal representation, and that then is a trigger for engaging everything else with. If it didn't have that, and I hadn't had that as a continuity of relationship, because obviously we're older now, but we've been together a long time, and I've been with Pauline since she was 16. I met her when she was 15, and in that sense, she's grown with me, and she's grown through the phases of adaptation of being a woman with me as I matured as a man. And we shared a great deal in life, including all the Jungian elements too. That's very, very significant creatively, because she is therefore an inner image for me and a portal to articulate other things. So yeah, if you know about the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, Rossetti, Millet, and Holman Hunt, the three originals, and their relationship with initially Lizzie Siddle, they basically fought over it, like who was going to paint her, who was going to have this creative relationship with her. But before they met her, they had an image, an idea in mind. She had to have red hair, long red hair, and have a particular look, because they all knew that this image they had within, which, if you like, is close to a Platonic form, at least for them as they understood it within consciousness. They had to find the girl externally who would trigger the release of their creativity from within. That's because their creativity is external. But if you're a writer or a filmmaker, even though there are external elements to that, it's still internal where you access it first, because it's a very solitary process of creativity. You have to engage with that, you have to engage with it emotionally. So my connection to the feminine is very, very much rooted in my relationship to Pauline. Obviously, it's just the way that's been. But psychologically, in terms of Jungian psychology, I feel that I understand the anima very, very well. And that's a huge claim to make, but I've been at that particular journey consciously for 47 years of my life, fully engaged in that. And I've gone some pretty strange places with respect to the power of that image, and relating to an external person, Pauline, and then mediating that inner and transcendent elements through a real physical and grounded relationship to an external woman, and then using that for the creativity. So that's the bedrock for it. But the thing is that they're all ideas, you know. They don't actually tell you about the process. The process itself is different, because it's a living thing, and it's led through emotion, and it also takes you over and goes places that you don't know about when you start, even though you have a theoretical idea about it probably, you know, and even some experience of it. When it really kicks off, it goes its own way, and that basically is how it happens. So my relationship to her triggers every female character in all of my scripts and everything else, not because necessarily she's done anything like it, which she hasn't in the most part, like some
I'm
of
glad you've added that.
That's
yeah.
Okay. Have done or experienced. It's because that you use the muse that you work with as the portal to the transcendent and to the unconscious. This is how the anima works on the inside. Now, if the inner representation and the outer representation are separate, that can cause a problem in terms of your outer relationships, because, you know, there is that mismatch then. If you know somebody deeply in an emotional way, and in terms of their on the surface personality, and then deeper down into their character, and deeper still down into the essence of their being, which you can call their soul, there's not going to be an easier separation as there would be if you only knew someone superficially, just say through a biological relationship. But if you have those other deepening levels of relationship, then you can use that external image to trigger you on the inside, and that for me is how it works.
So when you came to write this thing, when did you told me before, and this would have been off air, it didn't originally start as Lilith, did it? It was Nemesis when you first started.
I'll show you. Yeah. This is a version of the original book.
And of course, who's that on the front cover?
Well, that's Pauline as she was about...
He's yet to pay me for that, by the way,
about 36 years ago. But she's got the long auburn chestnut hair that she had in those days on it. It was called Nemesis. I'll just try and get the light off the screen. She didn't pose for that shot, by the way. She was a bit annoyed with me at the time.
On the day.
On the day, because she's trying to get out the door of the house, and I kind of pinned her up against the wall and took a photograph.
Yeah.
Which I was wont to do in those days. And we didn't have mobile phones then, so we had to use real cameras, so it was a real pain having to do it, and a real pain being on the receiving end of it too, probably.
Hence the expression.
Hence the look of vengeance and nemesis that was coming at me, because I dared to pin her up against the wall. Years later, when I came to pen the story, and once it started to come through and I realised that I needed an image, well, not so very long ago, when Google wasn't as extensive as it is, you'd have to pay someone for an image. I thought, well, I've got a picture, I'll just stick that on the front.
Yeah.
And it was literally that. It was for no outer reason other than the fact that I needed an image to go on the front. Now that's on the outside. On the inside, of course, because I do use her as a creative muse, obviously, or I relate to her as one. Then it was, oh yeah, that'll do, So there was, if you like, a rapport between the inner and the outer, which led to the result. And from either perspective, it's valid. The inner choice and the outer rationalisation for why that image was used, they reached the same conclusion. So yeah, Nemesis. How it came to be done is that I wrote a trilogy of books, and the BBC were interested in them. And that was in 2007, and then the financial crisis kicked in. We had a producer involved, a local one in Liverpool, Colin McEwen, who's well known, done films, loads of TV, and things like that. He really believed in me and what I'd written, even though the story was very odd, because although it started out as being a police story, if you like, a police procedural, it didn't survive the first page. It turned into something else. And over the 3 volumes, it became a kind of modern Grail myth. I just let it take over. And he really loved it because it was so different to anything that had been done before. And the BBC liked it too. It's just that they suddenly didn't have any money. So Colin said, can you do anything else other than that? Can you write anything else? And don't know. I'll see. So I went home and I sat down in front of the computer wondering what the heck was going to happen. And I thought, a bit like Carl Jung did when he sat down at his desk and said, I allow myself to go down into dark depths. He said he just put the pen down on the table, he just leaned back in the chair, shut his eyes, and he went down in the escalator. So I thought, well, it's good enough for him, good enough for me. So I had a go at that, and then this thing emerged. Literally, the story began to emerge. It came up in images first, and the idea of a descent was important. And the whole thing just emerged as a narrative, the plot line, everything, and it came up as Nemesis first, and then the tagline, if you like, the name Lilith. Behold, for I am Lilith, and my name is Retribution. And Retribution is Nemesis. So I thought, Nemesis, okay, we'll call it Nemesis. And most of the story came through, as I said, the whole of it, enough to write the story. But when I talked to Pauline about it, and we kind of released it on Amazon with an ISBN number, privately published, in order to contain the copyright for the story, she made some suggestions which made a huge amount of sense and really reinforced the story. So we had to do it again, and then we renamed it Lilith. And this is the expanded version of that which came out, and it became Lilith, the Last Temptation of Adam. We used the same picture, and that's an image of Lilith on the back, and you can see there, behold, I am Lilith and my name is Retribution. That shield at the bottom, by the way, is Gawain's shield.
Spotted that actually, because it's on the ebook version or the PDF version. There is that little shield there, and you did point that out to me before. You say that because the Green Man as well is also part of the story.
So you can see it on the spine of the book as well, the book cover there. So, of course, we couldn't use Pauline in the film because she wasn't as young as she used to be at the time. So we had to find somebody who would do it. Sorry about that, dear.
Oh, that's quite all right.
Yeah, she's fine about things like that, no problem. So we began to look for the right person, and to get the right person we needed the right look. And the way that Lilith has been portrayed has been as a goth recently, a typical sort of vamp, heavily made up, sort of exaggerated caricature of a figure. And that just didn't match the story at all as it had been written. So we needed to find a girl who would be able to embody that particular image. And the image that we wanted was someone who was virtual in appearance. And by that I mean in the Platonic sense of the Platonic form. And again by that what I mean, and lads, this is serious. This is serious stuff if you get there. And if you've never been there, you don't know. Forgive me for saying that. Believe me, if you do, you'll know, and if you don't, you don't know. But if you do, you really will.
I'm going to just quickly say on that point, I think a lot of the Jungian demographic, and myself included, back in the day, there is that sense of there's something over the horizon, in terms of like we're all unconscious now, but we'll be like the truth will be revealed, and it's something like an encounter with the self, an encounter with the higher personality, and like the Red Book is held up as kind of the example of that. Some of the stuff we've been going through privately behind the scenes, it's like it's not the Red Book. It's really not the Red Book. It is akin to this Platonic form idea. So I can understand that it's for and Plato knew that as well, of course, with his idea of Plato's cave, with no judgment built into there. It's like there is, you either see or you don't see, and that's that.
Jung's own life is a story of him not being able to resolve the anima, despite the fact that he, in modern terms at least, he coined that. He gifted it to us, but he didn't actually achieve it fully. In his own life, he didn't do it.
Well, he's criticised by one of his grandsons for that, isn't he?
He is indeed. Who's an analyst? Who's a Jungian analyst? Yeah.
As if to say he should have known better, which I think is a fair point, actually.
Yeah, he had a number of relationships. The most criticised of them all is the one with Tony Wolff, and he surrounded himself with a bodyguard of women who were known as the Valkyries, the women around Jung. Marie-Louise von Franz was one of the most formidable of them, but there were others as well, and they're all creative and wonderful in their own right, but a lot of them were like nuns in the sense that they didn't marry. They were married to him as an animus introject. So there was a lot of that going on. His wife was a wonderful woman, very, very creative in her own right, but for some reason that wasn't enough. And Tony Wolff offered allegedly something that she couldn't, and yet he never fully related to her in the way that he related to his wife. So his anima was divided between those two women, and then further subdivided across other women as well. In that sense, then he did actually fail to work with an understanding of the anima properly in a Platonic sense. So that's another angle to look at, but. It's true also of the animus, you know. The animus has a form, a Platonic form as well, guys. And if you want to understand the animus, you need to know about that, because otherwise you will not know how you're affecting women, girls. You just won't. You need to know about both of them, the anima and the animus. And remember, it's not an inner woman, the anima. The animus is not an inner man. It's projected. It tends to be projected that way. We've discussed before those issues. But when it is projected, it takes on a particular flavour and a particular power. And you then use that image to access the transcendent. But don't be beguiled by it, which is why I emphasise biology as much as I do. You need to understand that. Then you need to understand it as a relating function. Then you can access safely the transcendent, without being pulled into it, without being consumed, without losing your feet or the thread of your individuation path. And it's the same for women too. So we were looking, weren't we, for the girl who had the right look?
Yes, we were, which was incredibly difficult, really, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
One of the most difficult things I think we've done.
Yeah.
So what was the process that went into finding that particular girl?
Well, she had to fit the image as written. We had a lot of actresses, some of them very well-known ones, who were lined up and who wanted to do it because it's an incredible role. In fact, it's probably one of the best roles a woman could play if you actually understand the story. But the most important thing had to be the look, at least for us at that time. And the look that we were looking for was, as I say, someone who could represent the virtual Platonic form, and perhaps Botticelli's Venus, that kind of look as well, that virtual state that is from which you could draw out any woman. So it's all women, but none of them, and that's where the virtual quality comes in. So it's a woman who's almost plain rather than distilled in her appearance.
We couldn't go for anyone who had too obvious a look, could we?
No.
And when we tried to involve colleagues and so on in that process, they nearly always came out with something that was to do with their own subjective preference rather than the form itself, and therein lay a huge problem, really.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah.
And most of the guys, because they worked in the film industry or television, They were used to that kind of representation of the feminine, and they were pushing for their type based on what they had personally experienced. And we were trying to explain to them that that's not what we're looking for, and that if we find the right girl, it'll have an effect on you and on everyone else. I didn't believe it until we did, and when we did, people were going very, very peculiar and very, very strange around this girl, not because she looked a particular way, unless you emphasise that, and I don't mean with makeup, I mean with no makeup, or a particular hairstyle, just hair down, no ornate fingernails, no red lips, nothing,
just pared right back,
down to the essence. And just as Plato knew, from that any woman can be distilled, because it links with the virtual image as Carl Jung understood it, that's latent in the psyche, and from that it becomes an ancestral spirit as well. All of your ancestors are hooking into it, speaking directly to you through your own DNA, and that then surfaces in consciousness as this fascinating projection. So we had to find someone who could do that, and we did, in terms of an image, but the girl couldn't act.
I can remember when you found her, actually, you were working up here, and you called me up and basically said, you know, you'd found this young woman, and what did I think of her, and and it was quite a random find, as I recall.
Yeah, she answered the casting call that we sent out over the internet. And we got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of girls sending
some
pictures
very beautiful
in a conventional sense, but that's not, it wasn't what we wanted. But we got this particular girl, and we met her, and she has a very strong Lancs County accent.
For anyone who remembers the Boddingtons advert,
bless her.
In that direction, isn't it?
And there's nothing wrong with that in its context.
No.
So we found the face of Lilith, but we hadn't found the voice, and we put this to the guys in the industry, and they said, "Oh no, it's, you know, the voice is wrong. Oh, this is messing with my head, but the image is great." And they began to get really strange then, and they just couldn't. I said, "Look, we're going to have to dub it. We're going to have to find someone who has the voice of Lilith."
The creative solution, wasn't it?
The creative solution, and almost universally it was, "No, you can't do that." I thought, "What? Of course you can," but they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. So we were stuck, and then whilst we were working on that, we started some development stills and videos, and we got Maggie Riley involved, which is very interesting. I think how that happened.
Some synchronicity there.
A lot of synchronicity there. And while that was going on, one of our other projects started to get a huge amount of interest, and that was the Victrix trilogy, which is the mythic fiction based on Rome, the last days of the Roman Empire in Britain, and the role of gods and whatever in myths at the time of the crossover from the old religion to the Christian faith. And a lot of people were suddenly on that, and we drifted away from Lilith. But with respect to Maggie Riley, I'd already approached her. She was a singer-songwriter, wasn't she?
For Mike Oldfield.
For Mike Oldfield, who did Tubular Bells, and he
People will probably remember that from The Exorcist, when there's a theme tune to The Exorcist.
It's the theme tune for the original Exorcist movie, and he's a creative genius without a doubt. And Maggie had this amazing voice, this crystal clear voice, beautiful singing voice, and she'd written some amazing music. So, well, we both wrote to her and said, you know, would you be interested in a collaboration on the Victrix project? And she wrote back and said yes, and she said, "Oh, I see you've written a book called Lilith." Well, I have just produced, written and released a track called Lilith. This is more than a coincidence, she said, saying perhaps it's written in the stars. And I said, well, do you want to do a soundtrack for us on that? And she did. She did. And her music fits it incredibly well, the ambience, doesn't it, for what we want.
Even stuff that was pre-written as well.
Stuff that was pre-written before then, So the alchemy that was coming together of image and music, because music can paint emotion, can't it, in a way which is quite amazing. And if you pair that with the right image, you've got a very, very powerful message. And again, like we always do, you know, when we collaborate with other creatives, we let the musicians make the music, we let the artists do the artwork, the writers do the writing and so forth, and then the synergy comes. So that was very important. So yeah, we had the right girl, in luck. But we needed the voice, and then we got distracted, and then Lilith kept popping up like a cork. We couldn't get rid of it. We couldn't suppress it. It just kept appearing again, and every time it did, and some poor guy was exposed to it, literally, then things started to happen. One of the guys, who's an experienced filmmaker, kept staring at her on the screen.
Yeah.
And he couldn't be pulled away.
He couldn't do his day job.
He couldn't do his day job. He began to disappear over the event horizon, the black hole of his own unconscious.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, he rang you and asked you, didn't he, to help?
For psychological help.
Well, for help, yes, to stop that from happening, because he felt he was so close to it.
Yeah, it happened with others too. On one of the days that we were filming, this guy walked past her in the corridor. We knew him by sight because he worked in the building where we were filming, and his jaw dropped. And she had this white dress on, like she was going to a wedding. It wasn't a wedding dress; it was just a white dress, completely pared back, but glowing. And he said, "Wow, where's the wedding? Is she getting married?" No, we're just doing a film. I'll marry her. And he'd lost all of his rationality and followed her down the corridor, and we had to gently edge him away. And it's peculiar, because if you film this girl not in role, she has a completely different effect. Very, very strange. There's something about becoming that character and that synergy, which definitely embodies the Platonic form.
Well, I've experienced that as well. When you sent over some of the original footage that you did, which that's from the trailer. If anyone's seen the trailer, that's the girl that we're talking about. So it's that, and you showed me this. It's like 11 minutes, 20 minutes or something of just her standing in front of a green screen. She's got her arms up like this, and she's channeling something. And I can't do it justice, of course, but there's a bit where she turns and she's just.
Yeah, that was the best bit of acting she did, and it's like a laser, bang, straight in, and it illuminates the Platonic form. You know, it's peculiar, but that's exactly what we were looking for, because the Platonic form's where it's at, isn't it? And the Lilith story has to have a counterpoint to the feminine in that way, and it does. And there is a dark masculine figure as well that represents the animus, who has a similar effect on women as Freya's image did, on men, and that forms this anima animus drama that goes right the way through the trilogy. There are several men in the story, and there's several women. They're all at different ages and at different stages of development, so the whole drama is important. But those two figures and their antagonism between one another and how they form the through line, very, very important. But he definitely embodied the animus exactly as we wanted the character to do. And again, guys, it's important that you understand that figure too, because he's in you as well, deeply, maybe not on the surface, but you will be able to constellate that in yourself if you know what to do, and then you'll find that women start to see it in you as well, and that will help them to develop, and it will help you to develop. This is the whole point.
It's the synergy of it, isn't it?
It's the synergy.
Yes.
You can.
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, that's an incredibly important thing, because as we've said before, these things don't happen in a vacuum. They only happen through relationship, either to an outer person or if you try and develop it yourself on the inside. It's preferable to do both.
Yes.
I know this might seem a bit of an aside, but I was thinking too about Amy Manson.
Oh yeah.
As well, who was someone else who we considered for a while.
Well, she wanted to do it, didn't she?
She wanted to do it, because obviously we were trying to sort of get around the problem of the mismatch between Freya's look and the voice.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's important too, because she was in a BBC drama.
Desperate Romantics,
about the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So it's probably worth checking that out as well.
Oh, absolutely,
too.
Guys. Yes. If you can, Desperate Romantics. I think it's on YouTube, and you'll see the representation of Lizzie Siddle, who was their muse. She was called the first supermodel in the 1840s and 50s. She died a tragic death But without her, there would have been no pre-Raphaelite movement. They absolutely needed the relationship to her, and she became an artist in her own right, didn't she?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I think she was a better artist than
Rossetti.
Than Rossetti in the end.
Dante,
Yes.
Gabrielle Rossetti.
Yes. Yeah. So just something else worth looking up, really, because it just gives you different ways of approaching the same phenomena, doesn't it? Really, so it's not just all about the stuff that we've done, but it is out there as well.
It's the same
if you look
thing.
for it, it's the same thing essentially.
The portrayal was of a woman who was not heavily made up, was pared back, but just had essential elements that these artists could weave their creativity around, and they were absolutely fascinated by her through projection of the Platonic form, which is the undistilled, virtual, innate, ancestral image that's looking inwardly. Outwardly, though, this gets projected, and then in a transcendent, arising sense, it's something that you can aspire to if you know how to do it and do the right things. But of course, the anima and the dark side is a death demon, and you have the descent to hell as well. So you really need to know what you're doing when you're encountering these images.
Most of our audience currently are men. It's shifted since you. So in the old days, I think it was 99.9% male, I think. But slowly, it was since you joined the team, Pauline, it's crept up to now about 5% female. I was thinking about this, that the whole idea of individuation being a video game, and it's like shadow, then anima, then self, or some kind of workflow pattern. But it's like if the anima is the relating function, you can't relate unless you understand the animus, because it's a dance between the two of them. So would you say it's equally important than that, say, a man, speaking because our audience is mostly men, that they understand the animus as well as the anima, that they're actually on par and you can't really do one without the other?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential, James, and I think part of the problem, we've talked about this in the context of the shadow. I think part of the problem with approaching either the anima or the animus in a kind of formulaic way, which tends to be the case, with a traditional Jungian approach, that there are stages that you have to go through, is it can kind of almost arrest your development, I think, if you think that you can only start in a particular place. And if I think back, say, for example, to the beginning of our relationship, I mean, obviously I was very, very young. Steve was a fair bit older than me.
I still am.
Not a huge age gap,
No.
but at that age it's more significant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you were obviously already out there in the world, and you were a serving police officer.
Yeah, I was 21, she was 16.
Yeah, so you were kind of already out there and a man of action, and so on, which relates to a woman's animus development. But for me, you were more than just that. Obviously, you I guess you were the whole package, in so much as you had a spiritual side as well, a very obvious spiritual dimension to you because of the kind of stuff that you were into and steeped in,
which was Jungian, wasn't it?
Which was Jungian.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time there weren't very many serving police officers who sat in the lotus position on the filing cabinet.
Oh dear.
In the General Inquiry Office, for example.
I used to do that to wind them up, at work. I'd go into the sergeant's office and I'd climb up into a tall filing cabinet, sit in the lotus posture in full uniform and start going on Mani Padme Hum, to wind them up, because these guys had gone through the Second World War and then 30 years police service. So that was the last thing that they expected to drop out of the sky was somebody like that, some hippie in police uniform, which they thought me to be, because I would always grow my hair as long as I could get away with and do anything like that. There was difference. And I was very much into Eastern culture as well, which some of the guys on the Discord I think are a little bit aware of now. So hence the spiritual side, the Buddhism, for example.
It wasn't. I guess what I'm saying is it wasn't difficult for me to project my soul image onto somebody like that. I mean, obviously I'm looking back now, aren't I? A very long way with a lot of hindsight, but I mean, it's a mirror. It acts as a mirror for women as to how they can develop themselves. If you're fortunate enough to find that person who you can project your soul image onto in the first place. But having said that, the job is ultimately to take that back and develop it in yourself, because otherwise, particularly in a long-term relationship, you burden that person into carrying those aspects of the animus for you if you don't bother to do the work and to take those qualities back for yourself. But I guess I was very fortunate, really,
Nice of you to say.
in that regard, to have met someone who completed me.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say.
And but now, with I have to work on my own inner completion as well, and whatever that
well,
demands
you've been doing that
from
for
me. So,
decades.
yes, well, but it doesn't end, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
As I think we say in the handout, the heroes and heroines handout, it's a lifetime's journey.
It is.
So
yeah,
it's never fully done.
No, it isn't, and this will be my advice to the lads who are on a Jungian path, that don't stop with Carl Jung, because, as Pauline said, you'll get diverted if you do, particularly if you think it's going to be, there's a 4-stage process, and there's Eve and start of Eve and ends with Sophia or whatever. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
Sorry to interject there. I was just thinking, if I could just again use you as an example, if I think about the state of my development at that time, like I say, I was obviously very young, but I can remember being younger again than that, and nonetheless being aware of a spiritual dimension to my life, and feeling that the need for meaning was significant and important, and also to develop my intellect and so on. So it wasn't just a case of being drawn towards a purely physical man for reproductive purposes. I was well aware that there were other dimensions to my psyche, even then, even if I wasn't able to give them a name as such. So I think you have to be really careful about thinking you have to move through things in some kind of ordered way.
Things are there anyway, aren't they?
They are, definitely.
And it's like typology as well. This idea you have a dominant and inferior function. You start with dominant, go to inferior. It's such a it's not the way the real world works.
No,
it doesn't work like that at all. I always used to say to people who criticised Jung, and this is going back a long time, decades and decades ago, when it wasn't as popular as it is now. I mean, we've witnessed an explosion of popularity in Jungian work. Even if you went back 20 years, almost nobody was speaking about Carl Jung. It was a very rare knowledge. Now there's a lot of people are speaking about it. But I used to say that the best proof of Carl Jung is not in his theory. The theory is just like a post hoc justification for the observations that you make, if you like, because everything that validates Jung's theory is in the real world. It's not like you're creating a theory and then forcing the real world to meet it. He does actually explain things in the basic structures that he talks about. Some of the processes don't match.
They don't.
They just don't.
No.
But the things that he talks about, that he writes about, in the way that he does, are real. So the anima is absolutely real, and your starting point, if you want to develop, is going to be Plato. Believe me, you'll get past all of this nonsense if you can go to that. Go to the idea of the Platonic form, of the divine inner woman, or the divine transcendent feminine principle. Go to that. You can't attain it, because every individual woman, no matter who she is going to be, in Plato's understanding, an imperfect instantiation of the divine, of the potential of wholeness. But if you relate properly to a woman, you can access that divine form through relationship to her, and therefore you simultaneously access it within yourself. That's the way to do it. Don't think of these 4 stages nonsense.
No.
And the good thing about Plato is that it's independent of a religion. So there's no need to go on about Eve if you happen to be a Hindu or a Buddhist or another Middle Eastern religion or whatever, or an atheist. You're getting beyond the limitations of containment by a specific view, because you're going to the thing in itself, which is the thing that Jung said you can't get to. He said you can't understand the archetype. Plato gave you a way of doing it, or the best possible approach to doing it. And this is logos, this is the dialectic, but, and here's another big clue from Carl Jung, right? Thinking and feeling are both rational. They're both rational.
Mm-hmm.
If you're one-sided, if you're a TI like I unfortunately have been cursed with to some extent, or I do my best to compensate, or James, you need to develop your feeling. Yes, he's absolutely right about that.
Mm.
And he's right to say that in the normal run of things, they are probably mutually exclusive because they compete for the same thing, the rationality of relationship. Yeah, but to work out the dialectic, the Platonic dialectic properly through logos and accessing the forms properly, you need thinking and feeling, because for a Greek cast of mind from that particular period, an evaluative approach to logos is as valid as an analytical one. So therefore feeling and thinking are equally valid. And only if you create that as a theoretical problem in your mind will it be a problem. If you remove the idea that they're opposites and you transcend those opposites, you will, as a thinking introvert dominant, you will be able to access your feeling function, and the closer you get to that virtual image, the easier it will come through. And it's not just thinking and feeling. If you're a sensing or an intuitive type, then it will work in exactly the same way. So don't desiccate the functions, don't divide the anima or the animus up into 4 stages.
No.
It will confuse you and you'll become trapped.
Mm.
You become trapped by something that shouldn't trap you because you're not getting to the thing in itself. Then the theory that you have is getting in the way. Yes, Jung is right, but he doesn't always show you the right way of getting there.
No. I think also too, Stephen, so say for example in something like Man and His Symbols, if you look at Marie-Louise von Franz's contribution, certainly to the animus, then a lot of the examples that are given are of that time in which it was written. I mean, in that sense, it really needs updating, and I guess that's what you've done through Lilith as well. You know, you've attempted to make these ideas more accessible, because that can be very off-putting if you're reading about I don't know, examples from the past and you just don't appear to relate to modern everyday life. So it's important to bring things up to date as well.
You need something that's timeless to get to something that is timeless. That's really important. And the more of a block you put on that, the more of a problem it's going to be, because you just end up falling into a loop. And philosophy's like that, you know, whatever school of rationalistic contemporary philosophy, you know, whatever, you will end up in a logic loop that becomes a prison. You need direct experience, and this is where gnosis is important. But knowledge of the heart, right, isn't just thinking, nor indeed is it just feeling, nor indeed is it both, but it is a doing thing. It is an activity, it is an engagement, it is a process that forms part of the narrative of life, which is why a myth, if it's good enough, will take you right the way through, from beginning to end, right the way through, and will show you those various transitional stages that you have to go through to distill yourself out from, which is alchemical as well. And this is the problem with the Rosarium, for example. Though it's a great allegory, it doesn't really tell you how to do it, because it can't in that way, because the only thing that can guide you through that is real world experience. That is to be engaged in that process, and that process is engaged with in the real world outside of psychotherapy all the time. People are going through it as part of their natural lifespan development. That's the meaning of individuation. But the fundamental elements are masculine and feminine, regardless of how things are looked at these days, by the way, you know, because those elements are still there underneath the surface of all that terrible suffering that's going on, with people not being able to feel that they can identify themselves in whatever way. There are deep structure issues that are going on. It will pass in time. It will. It may be decades before this phase does pass, but it will, because the universals will come through and they will come back.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the beginning of our mentorship model that we had with each other. It's this idea of You know, there's consciousness and there's unconsciousness, and you don't know what you're unconscious of. And like taking a piece of theory, like say a typological model, it doesn't tell you what you're unconscious of. You stick it onto your own field of consciousness, and then you try and interpret everything through it. So it's not actually digging into your own unconscious at all. And so when we first started this, you know, and I had all whatever issues that, you know, I had at the current time, you knew what the problem was straight away. And you sent me Lilith, the script, basically, and I was like, what? Why? Like, I thought you were going to help me, you know, therapy, or, you know, you were going to hypnotize me over the phone or something. And you're like, no, just read the script to Lilith, and it's all in there. And I was like, right, okay. And I did, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then I was like, I have no idea what the anima is. Like, I get it from theory, I have no idea what it is. And this is the problem of being the overamped TI, is exactly as you said, it's that logic loop that you get yourself caught in. And so the biggest frame shift for me thus far is exactly what you just said, which is the idea of thinking and feeling both being rational functions and accessing the real feeling. It's not, and this is also why taking a collective myth and sticking it to yourself doesn't work. Especially if you are a thinking type in that way, you're like, I can spot the motifs and I can see the archetypes in action. It's like that doesn't matter. You're not feeling anything. It might bring up a tear sometimes because it's so profound, but it's not really there. And then over time, as I very, very, very slowly started to access a little bit of that feeling function, just a tad, and I'm by no means a finished product at all. That's when a taste of the divine form came through. And when that taste comes through, it just knocked me out, basically. And I got that first initial taste from that Freya test footage. I was like, this is kind of really weird. I can't think my way out of what she is inducing in me. It's like, you know, you get yourself really high, for example, of LSD or DMT. It's like, that's real, and it's like you can't think your way out of that. If it was the same thing with that, you know, I wasn't wandering around like a madman, but it was like okay, this is weird.
It's not sexual. It's different.
It's not sexual. It's the weirdest thing. And like when you were saying about the Rosarium as well, a real life experience of the Rosarium, and I have had one of those. Very, very weird. Nothing involving that is sexual. It might appear on the surface, but it's like it's down here, where whatever this particular chakra would be. I've no idea about that type of thing. It's just, yeah, it's there, you feel it. It's not it's not a raging animalistic thing. It's kind of a healing thing, actually. And so it's all of that is within that plot of Lilith, and it's like, it went, just to my own journey, it went from being like, why are you showing me this? I can identify the archetypes in action, to being like, no, I get it. No, I do get it. Insofar as I do. And it's been an incredibly healing process, just to be completely honest with you.
If I could just flip that for a moment for the ladies who are watching as well, because we're talking, I suppose, about the practical application of things and the utility of something, you know, in someone's life. I'm reminded of an interview with Jung himself, where he talks about how he went to a dinner, an academic dinner basically, and he had the misfortune to sit next to a woman who was certainly well esteemed academically, and she spent the whole evening, you know, just talking about various theories and ideas and so on, and he talks about the experiences being like listening to the Encyclopedia Britannica basically, and the only thing that kind of kept him alive was eating and drinking. And about an hour and a half later, when she'd sort of finished with her exposition, he basically turned to her and said, well, and tell me, what do you think? And you know, she was obviously quite stunned by that, but there's a lesson in there. It's for women that it's not just the acquisition of academic knowledge and ideas, as in just, you know, collecting things for the sake of collecting them, but it's about having your own ideas, your own thoughts, and developing your own intellectual capacity as opposed to just acquiring them from other sources. And again, Marie-Louise von Franz backs this up as well and talks about the importance of women thinking for themselves. So, for example, if women are trying to learn about things academically, and they're looking at all sorts of different sources of information, that they ask themselves the question, well, what do I think of all of this? What are my views? What are my ideas about what I'm reading, as opposed to just acquiring information? And that's, again, that's the job of the animus, of the positive pole of the animus when it's working well. So it's not just about trying to emulate men intellectually, or appearing to be knowledgeable about lots of different things. It's about taking those sources and then having your own perspective on things. So again, it's I guess we're linking into with sort of the handmade life again. It's this idea of crafting something in your own way, on your own behalf.
Carl Jung is not your psyche, basically. Your own psyche is your own psyche, and that's maybe it's mostly thinking types. I don't know. That's such a weird thing to get your head around, having gone on this journey, because it's like it's the vector of information, and the vector for gnosis lies outside yourself, is what that presupposes, and it's like it doesn't. They aid the internal prompt that can get you to where you want to go, and it is an internal feeling. It's a visceral thing. It's not a thought, and that's been hugely valuable to myself. So
it's the way to get somewhere. Carl Jung is
undoubtedly
a way to go to get somewhere, but he's not the goal in itself. And that's where people fall into the trap of Carl Jung's personal myths somehow obscuring theirs, and then they become facsimiles of an impression of a deceased personality's persona. In effect, that's like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and they're not real. They're not authentic in and of themselves. The best way, honestly, to get to the anima in that transcendent sense is to go after the Platonic form and then relate to a real woman. And that will bridge it on the outside and the inside, and it's release. Job done, isn't it? Job is done at that point. It's released. It's brought into the world. It's instantiated. You have to make a suitable home for the anima as a man in yourself. You have to build the vessel, otherwise it won't be there. And you can't insist that an outer woman does it for you.
No.
You have to create the vessel. If you do that, you will attract the right woman. And it's the same for a woman. If a woman builds the proper vessel for herself, for her animus, then she will become an incredibly attractive, irrespective of what she looks like, because looks are important, but they're not ultimately decisive when you work on a transcendent level.
Well, that was one of the arguments that was put or in defence of Jung about his interest in some of the Valkyries, and Tony Wolfe and some of the other women too, that he was able to see beyond, their looks, if you like, to something else, and that he could value, other qualities that they had, whether that's, absolutely accurate in all respects, I don't know, but
in your individual life, though, you do need to make a vessel for this Platonic form to enter into you. It is the communion then, and then you can start to make sense of the rosarium. If you don't make a suitable vessel, it will not enter. It just won't, and you're going to be chasing illusions for the rest of your life. You really are. You won't know how to relate. You won't to yourself or others. If you're a thinking type, you won't know how to feel. If you're a feeling type, you won't know how to think. You won't be able to join together the so-called irrational functions of sensing and intuition, and then all four of them together, so they're all options for you to use from within. If you just stay one-sided and you don't access that. It was such an insight that Plato had, such an incredible insight. And the only people who understand him are artists. They will default understand that. Real creatives, no matter what kind of artist they are, writers, filmmakers, fine artists? Where are the philosophers? It's in a, as Jung said, it's in a lamentable state. It's so horrendously one-sided now. Philosophy, just as psychology's gone wrong as well. So that's honestly the way to do it. And if you're a therapist, as a man, if you can do that, you can work with other women safely.
Yes.
Without harming them or yourself.
Yeah, it's so important.
It is very, very important because if you work in depth with women, as a man, you're going to find yourself exposed to things that if you're not prepared for, you'll have no idea how to deal with them. Yeah. The way to do it on the outside is to have a good relationship that is literally heart to heart, and on the inside to be able to access the platonic form. Then you will be in proper relationship to your anima, and it will not pollute your relationships to other women. The same is true for women working as therapists, and they work with men, because otherwise every encounter you have will challenge you so much you won't be able to work with it properly.
We used to have a lot of female patients come to you and say such things as, I want to know everything you know. Yeah. Like they just wanted to acquire it, or for themselves.
They break down in tears and say things because of the transference, and say and literally want to eat what they imagined my mind was, and the intellect, and absorb that in. And I remember one woman said to me, "Thank God you're not good looking, because your mind is fascinating." And in other words, she was saying if you had that, in her perspective, on top of that, then she would have been completely crippled just by the encounter.
Yes.
So you have to understand this and the effect that you're having.
And there's the animus, isn't it?
And that's an example of the animus.
The desire to just acquire
and
knowledge.
Even female students who we've trained as therapists in the past have had the same kind of reaction.
They've had the same problem.
It's the power of the word, or as they understand it to be the power of the word. And Jung had that too. And there were women who wanted to displace Pauline, not in any real physical sense, but in a psychological sense.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
And fortunately, we knew what that meant, what it was, how it was working through, and we were able to help those young women, and some of them were middle-aged women at the time, and one was even older, but to help them to develop their animus through that understanding. But if that's not there, you can imagine the chaos that will cause in people's lives.
Well, that was my point before, really, in the example I gave with Jung and this female academic.
Yes.
It's not just about the acquisition of ideas, because you can do, if you don't do anything with it, if it doesn't go anywhere, then that's all it is. It's no more than that. You haven't developed yourself intellectually at all if that's where you stop.
Yep. So all those things are important. The Lilith story is it is quite something. It really is, and it does form part of the promise that we made to Franz Jung to bring his father's ideas within reach of ordinary people. And to do that story has to be not obviously full of named archetypes, so you can point at them and say, oh, there's the anima, there's the animus, there's the shadow, there's the self, there's the warrior, hero, magician, lover. What a pile of crap. What a pile of artifactual crap. It must reflect real life, and not just real life externally, but simultaneously the real life of the inner world and the drama as that unfolds. Then you don't have to name things, because they're all there, they're all present, and they are in context. As soon as you start to reduce things and create caricatures and cutouts and make a pastiche, it becomes nonsensical. It really does, and there's a lack of engagement and a lack of feeling. But to engage with, dare I say it, instincts, one of those forbidden words for some people, you will then find the drama of life unfolding, and then archetypes, as they can be understood, will have their proper context. The whole thing works at that point. So that's the way to produce an effective myth, psychological myth.
So you're saying that Lilith won't help you integrate your inner archetype of the Red Book, but it will help you relate properly.
Make your own Red Book, And while you're at it, have a life. Engage with real life, engage with your life span as it unfolds. If you do that, you will encounter archetypes, real ones, and you can measure them up against yourself as you unfold. But other than that, if you're not careful, then you will lose your way, and that's why people get neurotic. That's why they suffer, because they lose their way.
And with those final moving words, I think it's probably best that we closed up the show today. So thank you everybody for watching. Of course, you can pick up your copy of Lilith the book, which of course is being turned into a film. It's in pre-production, by clicking the link in the description down below. Of course, we'd really appreciate it if you did that, and it would be super useful for yourself on your own journey going forward. And apart from that, have a fantastic day. The lockdown's going to be lifting fairly soon, at least in England, so we're all looking forward to that. I can finally shave off my teenage beard. So cheers. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Pauline. See you all again real soon.